I never thought a tiny creek behind my house would become the stage for one of the wildest HOA battles of my life. To me, that stream was simple. It ran cool in the summer, it kept my lawn alive, and it reminded me of the days when I used to skip rocks with my father. To Karen, our HOA president and self-declared guardian of the neighborhood, it was an eyesore, a messy, uncontrolled thing that ruined the community's image. So one bright morning she marched down with bulldozers and a clipboard army, smiling like a queen about to conquer new land. Within hours my creek was buried under tons of gravel. She thought she'd won. She thought she had beautified the neighborhood. What she didn't realize was that this so-called victory wasn't just an attack on me, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Because that little creek didn't just water my grass, it fed the entire HOA's water system, and when Karen blocked it, she pulled the plug on her own empire. Before we dive in, drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing our community from around the world. When I first bought the house, people told me the creek was more of a nuisance than a blessing. You'll regret having running water back there, one neighbor warned me with a shake of his head. But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. The creek was narrow, barely 8 feet across, but it carried a steady trickle from the hills above. In summer, it gurgled like a quiet soundtrack behind my backyard. In winter, it slowed its icy edges, framing reflections of the bare oak trees. To me, it was nature's reminder that life keeps moving forward whether the HOA liked it or not. I grew up near water. My dad taught me how to fish in streams like this, and when I was a boy I learned how to skip rocks until my wrist hurt. That creek wasn't just part of my property, it was part of my identity. And I'll tell you, when you're a middle-aged man dealing with HOA politics, holding on to something pure and grounding matters. But Karen, oh, Karen hated it. Karen had been HOA president for 7 years, and if you think that sounds like a long time to hold a volunteer role, you're right. It wasn't because no one else wanted it, it was because she made sure no one else could take it. She ran the HOA like a monarchy, complete with loyal subjects and, of course, a kingdom of rules that always seemed to shift in her favor. And Karen had decided my creek didn't fit the community aesthetic. The first time she mentioned it, I thought she was joking. We were at a neighborhood barbecue, one of those forced bonding events where everyone pretends to like each other while silently judging who brought store-bought potato salad. Karen walked up to me, her smile sharp enough to cut glass, and said, "That creek behind your house? It really lowers the tone of the neighborhood, don't you think?" I laughed. "It's a creek, Karen. Nature's been here a little longer than your HOA." She didn't laugh back. Instead, she gave me the look, the one I'd come to know all too well. Lips, pursed eyes, narrowed clipboard clutched like a weapon. That look meant war. From then on, it became a recurring theme. Karen complained at meetings that the creek attracted mosquitoes or posed a safety hazard. She said children could fall in even though the water was barely knee-deep. She claimed the sound of running water distracted from property values, which made as much sense as saying sunsets made houses harder to sell. Every time she spoke, I felt the weight of her words rippling through the other homeowners. Some nodded along, eager to stay in her good graces. Others stayed silent, unwilling to pick a fight. And me, I rolled my eyes, cracked sarcastic jokes, and went home to listen to the creek babble against the stones. I figured that was the end of it. After all, what could the HOA actually do about a natural waterway? But here's the thing about people like Karen, they never stop at complaints. They escalate. Always. The letters started first. Official-looking envelopes tucked under my doormat stamped with the HOA logo. Notice of environmental hazard. Notice of safety violation. Each one accusing my creek of crimes it couldn't possibly commit. I half expected the next letter to charge it with tax evasion. Then came the suggestions. Maybe I should consider covering it up. Maybe I could redirect it underground with pipes. Maybe Karen said with a faux-friendly grin I could work with the HOA to beautify the area. I ignored her, politely at first, then bluntly. But Karen wasn't the kind of person you could ignore. One evening I came home from work and found 3 HOA board members standing at the edge of my backyard, peering down at the creek like they'd discovered a crime scene. One of them scribbled notes while Karen pointed dramatically at a floating leaf. I swear if she could have roped off the area with yellow tape and called it Exhibit A, she would have. I walked out and asked what they were doing. "Inspection," Karen said. "We're documenting violations." Violations of what I asked. "HOA standards," she snapped. "This creek is unsanitary." I picked up a handful of water and let it trickle through my fingers. "Looks pretty clean to me." Karen glared. "That's not the point. It's about appearances. Our neighborhood prides itself on order and beauty, and this," she gestured like she was pointing at a dumpster fire instead of a stream, "is neither." I wanted to laugh, but I also felt something else creeping in: anger. It was one thing for Karen to gossip at barbecues. It was another for her to trespass onto my property and declare war on nature itself. I told them to leave. They did, but not before Karen leaned in close and whispered, "The HOA always wins." It should have sounded ridiculous, but the way she said it, I believed she thought it was true. That night I sat on my porch and listened to the creek. The moonlight shimmered on the water, and for the first time since I'd moved in, I didn't find it peaceful. I found it fragile, vulnerable, like Karen might actually find a way to destroy it. I reminded myself the creek had been here long before Karen, long before the HOA, long before anyone had thought to measure property values or paint mailboxes the same shade of beige. Surely it could withstand one power-hungry suburban monarch. But deep down, I knew better. People like Karen don't stop until they get what they want. And for reasons I still didn't understand, what she wanted was to bury my creek alive. And so, I started paying closer attention. I began to keep copies of the letters. I recorded HOA meetings where she ranted about safety hazards. I wasn't planning revenge, not yet. I just knew I had to be ready. Because when Karen sets her sights on something, she doesn't let go. And unfortunately for me, the thing she wanted gone was flowing right through my backyard. The letters were just the warm-up act. Karen never opens with the heavy artillery. She softens you with paperwork first, like a boxer working the ribs before the knockout. The envelopes multiplied pale beige logo in the corner, my name printed as if the HOA were the IRS. Each one came with a different accusation dressed up in polite legalese: standing water mosquito vector, unsightly riparian overgrowth, and my favorite, auditory disturbance, resulting from uncontrolled natural water flow. Apparently God himself was in violation. I kept them all. I date-stamped the flaps and filed them in a red folder labeled "When the Stupid Needs Proof." Still, it wears on you. Even when you know you're right, the drumbeat can make you wonder if you're crazy. That's part of the tactic. Don't be correct, be constant. Then came the door knocks. First, a board member with a tight tie and a looser grasp on property law. Then a neighbor who whispered that Karen's just trying to help you know. Then a landscaper I'd never hired who said the HOA had authorized a consultation on naturalization. He meant sterilization mulch, pebble beds, vinyl boulders that look like props from a children's play. I sent him away with a bottle of water and a warning not to cross the fence line again. The email blasts started next. Subject lines like "Community Safety Update" and "Neighborhood Cleanliness Standards." There were stock photos of smiling families holding hands in front of identically pruned hedges and bullet points about eliminating hazards. Karen never named my creek directly. She referred to certain problematic features, but anyone who could read a map knew. If you followed the arrows in her slideshow, they all pointed to my backyard like every conspiracy meme you've ever seen. It all built toward the meeting. If you've never been to an HOA meeting run by a tyrant with a clipboard, imagine a courtroom drama staged in a cafeteria lit by flickering fluorescence with coffee that tastes like burned anxiety. The clubhouse multipurpose room was packed. The retirees came early and secured the front row, arms folded like jurors. The parents clustered by the door, ready to bolt if a babysitter texted. The skeptical few hovered near the backhands and pockets, faces set to neutral. And Karen, she stood at the podium beneath the HOA banner like a themed dictator. She opened with gratitude for community engagement, which meant she loved having an audience. Then she clicked to her first slide, a photo of the creek after a storm, brown with silt leaves caught in the bend. This, the caption read in 20-point font, "is what we're living with." I raised my hand. "That's called rain," I said. Some people chuckled. Karen's smile thinned. "We have documented issues," she continued, clicking through photos. A close-up of a mosquito, clearly a stock image with a watermark they forgot to crop. A child standing beside a different creek, entirely pine trees in the background, none in our subdivision. An infographic about West Nile that looked like it had been ripped from a fear-mongering Facebook post. "We cannot risk the health and safety of our families," she said, voice trembling, just enough to sound noble. Then she pulled out the paperwork. "We consulted a specialist." She gestured to a man in a neon vest who nodded sagely. He smelled like diesel and had the word operations embroidered where his name should have been. "He recommends abatement and beautification. In plain language, we control the hazard and make the area match community standards." "Define control," I said. "Containment," she replied, avoiding my eyes. "Stabilization. A more uniform presentation." "Layman's terms," I said louder. "Are you planning to bury it?" A murmur rippled through the room. People turned to look at me, then back to Karen. She tapped her clicker. New slide, a rendering of a dry creek bed, really a grave made of decorative rock. Imagine a serene, maintenance-free landscape feature, she cooed. No stagnant water, no erosion, no liability. There it was. Bury nature, call it serenity, bill it to the neighbors. I stepped forward. That stream is a live watercourse. It predates these houses, our fences, and your bylaws. You don't have jurisdiction. Karen's eyebrows did a small victory dance. This was the moment she'd prepared for the ambush paper. She fanned out photocopies like a magician. Section 7.2, she read. The HOA may remedy conditions that detract from the uniform appearance or safety of the neighborhood on any lot visible from a common area or adjoining parcel. Visible from a common area, I repeated. Your view line ends at my fence. Water crosses boundaries, she said smoothly. So do our responsibilities. A board member chimed in, reading a paragraph about nuisance abatement. Another mentioned stormwater. Someone else mentioned insurance exposure. They had coordinated, rehearsed. The retirees nodded rhythmically, like a metronome set to compliance. I took a breath. Show your permits, I said. Your environmental review. Your proof the stream's non-navigable and non-protected. Show me the county authorization that lets you touch it. Karen paused, half a beat, but enough. We are in consultation, she said at last. The room interpreted that as we have authority. I interpreted it as we don't, but we hope to fake it till the gravel arrives. A neighbor raised his hand. Tom golf shirt, part-time warrior. My lawn's been soggy for years, he said. If we beautify, will it stop? The man in the neon vest nodded. We'll improve water movement, he promised, which is the kind of sentence that means nothing and sounds reassuring. Tom looked pleased. Karen's smile returned. I felt the shift, then not fact, but feeling. Most people don't want the right answer. They want relief from uncertainty. Karen was selling certainty, tidiness, safety sameness. And she'd wrapped it in enough official language to sound like permission. So I did what I could. I told a story. When I was 10, I began a developer, drained a marsh near our town, and called it progress. The frogs disappeared. The mosquitoes got worse. The basements flooded every spring because there was nowhere for the water to go. They spent 5 times as much money trying to fix what they'd broken as they would have spent leaving it alone. The room quieted. Even the neon vest leaned on his boot. This creek isn't the problem, I said. It's the solution. It moves water where it needs to go. If you bury it, it will find another path through your yards, your foundations, your flower beds. Karen clicked to a slide labeled Community Consensus. We appreciate your perspective, she said, voice tight. But this board is empowered to act. A board member made a motion, authorize remediation and beautification of the identified water feature. Second, another said, discussion. Karen asked perfunctory. I raised my hand again. If you touch that stream without proper authority, I said, calm as a courthouse clock, you'll be liable for every consequence, environmental, structural, financial, and I will hold you to it. Karen didn't blink. Duly noted, she said. All in favor. Hands rose, not all but enough. People who feared mosquitoes, people who feared Karen, people who liked the word uniform because it promised they'd never have to think about anything complicated again. The motion carried. A few in the back shook their heads. One elderly woman pinched the bridge of her nose like she'd seen this movie before. Gavel tap. Meeting adjourned, Karen declared triumphant. The crowd broke into pockets of chatter. The neon vest shook hands with board members and slipped away with a folded plan tube. I gathered my folder and walked past Karen. She watched me with that gleam, a hunter who's convinced the prey is cornered. Don't take this personally, she said, false gentle. It's just for the good of the community. Karen, I said the creek is the community. You just can't control it, so you want to kill it. She stepped closer. The HOA always wins, she whispered again, as if the words were a spell. I smiled not because I felt like it, but because I suddenly remembered where that creek went after it left my yard and what it fed before it reached the retention pond no one ever thought about until the fountain stopped working. If Karen wanted a war of control, she'd pick the wrong enemy. Water doesn't fight, it waits. 3 mornings later, I woke to the low growl of diesel and the wearied beep-beep of machinery backing into place. I stood at my kitchen window and saw orange cones, a flatbed of river rock, and men in hard hats rolling out geotextile like a burial shroud. The creek lifted a little breeze as if sighing. I picked up my camera, my red folder, and a thermos of coffee. If they were going to turn my watercourse into a grave, they were going to do it on record. The thing about HOA projects is they usually crawl along at a snail's pace. Committees, budgets, delays, weeks can pass between a vote and a single blade of grass getting trimmed. But when Karen wants something suddenly, the HOA operates like a military strike force. That morning I was brushing my teeth when the first rumble reached me. Low, metallic, insistent. My bathroom mirror rattled slightly. I thought maybe someone was mowing too early. Then came the beeping, that rhythmic beep 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 of heavy machinery reversing. My stomach dropped. I didn't even spit, I just ran to the window with toothpaste foaming at the corners of my mouth. And there it was. A bulldozer, yellow and massive, crawling across the street like an armored beast. Behind it, 2 dump trucks, their beds stacked high with gravel that glistened like gray tombstones. Cones were already out marking my property like a crime scene. And at the center of it all, perched proudly with her neon safety vest and oversized clipboard, was Karen. She looked like a general preparing for a victory parade. I stormed outside, still half-dressed, toothpaste on my shirt. The neighbors were gathering on lawns watching. Some cheered, actually cheered like it was a community event. Others just shook their heads. One kid clapped his hands and shouted, "Dig it up, Karen," like she was leading a circus act. "What is this?" I yelled over the machinery. Karen turned, adjusting her sunglasses as if she were about to deliver a presidential address. "Community improvement," she shouted back. "Sanctioned by the board." "This is my property," I said. She flipped through her clipboard with mock authority. Section 7.2, HOA jurisdiction. The vote passed. We're beautifying. Beautifying. That's what she called dumping literal tons of gravel into a living stream. I jumped the fence into my backyard boots, squishing into the damp soil, and ran toward the creek. The bulldozer operator hesitated when he saw me lifting his hand like he wasn't sure if he should proceed. Karen marched up beside the machine, slapped the side with her palm, and shouted, "Keep going, you're authorized." That's when the first cascade of gravel hit the water. It sounded like thunder-sharp grinding final. Pebbles splashed the creek, gurgled in protest, and brown water frothed up like it was gasping for air. My chest tightened. This wasn't just landscaping. It was a burial. I waved my arms. "Stop. You don't have the permits, you don't have the authority, and you damn sure don't have my consent." Karen smirked. "Consent isn't required when it's for the good of the community." I laughed bitterly. "The creek doesn't belong to your community. It belongs to nature." "Nature doesn't pay HOA dues," she snapped. That line actually got applause. Real, actual applause from a cluster of neighbors. I wanted to scream. I pulled out my phone, started recording. "This is illegal," I said loudly into the camera. "Documenting the destruction of private property, environmental violation, and trespassing. Every face here is evidence." Karen leaned into my shot with a grin. "Go ahead, post it online. The board stands by me." Behind her, the dump truck tilted its bed, unleashing another avalanche of stone. The creek's surface vanished under the crush. The water surged, trying to escape, but it was smothered. Fish flopped helplessly before disappearing under the blanket of gravel. The sound of running water, a sound I'd lived with for years, was silenced in minutes. It felt like watching someone suffocate. The crowd shifted. Some were clearly uncomfortable now. An older neighbor muttered, "Doesn't seem right," but didn't step forward. That's the power of HOA politics, fear disguised as compliance. I shouted again to the operator, "You realize you're liable for every shovel of this, right? When the county comes, they'll have your name." He hesitated, wiping sweat from his brow. Karen barked, "Ignore him. He's obstructing progress." Progress. That word tasted like ash. The machines roared for another hour. They poured gravel until the creek was nothing but a pale scar running through my yard. No shimmer of water, no trickle of sound, just a long, ugly wound where life used to flow. When it was done, Karen strutted to the center of the gravel bed, planting her neon-vested figure like a conqueror raising a flag. She actually spread her arms and declared, "Now this is beauty." Neighbors clapped again, though, less enthusiastically. Some shuffled home. A few even looked away ashamed. I stood on the bank, fists clenched. "You just killed it," I said, my voice shaking. "You think you won, but you have no idea what you've done." Karen lowered her sunglasses, smirk cutting across her face. "Correction," she said. "What we've done. The HOA always wins." Then she marched off, clipboard under her arm, as if she'd just signed the Declaration of Independence. I stood there long after the trucks left, staring at the grave. The silence was unbearable. No birdsong, no gurgle of water, just gravel and the distant hum of sprinklers in other people's yards. But here's the thing about water, it doesn't care about Karen or clipboards or HOA bylaws. Water finds its way. It always does. And deep down, I knew when it found its new path, Karen and her precious HOA kingdom were going to regret every single rock they dropped that day. The silence was the first thing I noticed. For years, I had fallen asleep to the steady gurgle of the creek. It wasn't loud, just a soft background hum that made the nights feel alive. But that evening, after Karen's gravel parade, I sat on my porch with a beer and realized how unnerving the absence was. No running water, no frogs, no chorus of crickets that usually sang along the banks. Just stillness like someone had pressed mute on nature itself. The next morning, the consequences showed up like uninvited guests. The grass along the back fence turned brittle, pale at the tips. I spotted a fish belly up in the shallow puddle where the creek used to bend. Dragonflies buzzed low and confused as if they'd lost their runway. Even the birds seemed to avoid my yard, circling once before flapping off to greener places. Meanwhile, Karen was celebrating. I wish I were exaggerating. By noon, she had organized what she called a victory brunch at the clubhouse. White folding chairs, cheap champagne, a banner that read, HOA Beautification Project Success. She stood at the podium like a queen, after conquest sunglasses perched on her head, voice booming through the rented speaker system. Today, she declared, we reclaimed our neighborhood from chaos. Today, we turned an unsightly hazard into a symbol of order. The crowd clapped politely. Some genuinely believed her swept up in her performance. Others just clapped because not clapping meant getting on her bad side. That's how Karen ruled fear disguised as enthusiasm. I didn't attend, of course. I stayed home trimming my bushes with deliberate slowness, but I could hear the cheers echoing across the subdivision. My phone buzzed with a message from a neighbor, a good man who didn't want his name dragged into HOA crossfire. She's bragging like she just built the pyramids. I'm sorry, man. I smiled bitterly. That was Karen, destroy something, then throw herself a party. By evening, she was posting photos online. Shots of her posing on the gravel bed, hands on hips, chin tilted, like she was on the cover of Suburban Dictators Monthly. Captions dripped with self-praise, safety restored. Hazards eliminated. The HOA delivers once again. The likes rolled in mostly from her inner circle. A few comments questioned the project, but Karen's allies drowned them out with praise. So proud of our leadership. Finally, someone doing the hard work. Karen, you're a hero. A hero. For killing a creek. I wanted to reply with the truth, with pictures of the dead fish, the cracked mud, the ruined bank. But I didn't. Not yet. Let Karen bask in her self-made glory. I knew something she didn't. Something that would turn her champagne bubbles flat very soon. The first real signs arrived 3 days later. I was mowing my front lawn when I saw a neighbor, Mr. Howard, a retired teacher, standing over his flower bed with a puzzled look. His roses sagged their leaves, curling inward. He held the garden hose, but water trickled out in a weak stream. Water pressure's low, he muttered. Never had this problem before. That night, another neighbor complained in the community Facebook group. Anyone else's sprinklers not working properly, my lawn's turning brown. Replies flooded in. Lawns, gardens, fountains, all struggling. And yet Karen was silent. The irony was delicious. My creek wasn't just a trickle of water behind my house. It was the main artery feeding the HOA's irrigation system. Buried under gravel, the flow had been cut off. Without it, the entire neighborhood was drying up. But in those first few days, most folks didn't make the connection. They just cursed the utility company or fiddled with their sprinkler timers. Karen even sent out an email blast, temporary water issues. The board is working on it. Remain calm. Remain calm. Classic Karen, say it like she's the captain of a sinking ship. Meanwhile, the damage spread. The ornamental fountain at the entrance sputtered, coughing up bubbles like a dying fish. The prized community garden, Karen's pride and joy, wilted under the September Sunday. By the end of the week, entire stretches of green lawn turned a crispy shade of beige. And still Karen kept smiling. She walked her morning route with her little dog chin held high, waving at neighbors like a queen surveying her kingdom. She told anyone who complained, "Don't worry, the board has it under control." But behind closed doors, I knew she had to be panicking. I started to notice subtle cracks in her mask. At the grocery store, she snapped at a cashier for bagging items out of order. At a board member's driveway, I overheard her muttering about lazy contractors who can't follow instructions. And at one point, she actually stood at the edge of my yard, staring at the gravel bed with her arms crossed, lips pressed thin. I almost walked out to say something. Almost. But I stopped myself. Because the truth was, the less I said, the more her own decisions would hang around her neck like a millstone. And believe me, that stone was getting heavier by the day. 1 week after the invasion, the first official complaint landed. The HOA received a letter from the city. It wasn't about my creek, it was about water usage. Apparently, the neighborhood's irrigation system had spiked in demand as people tried desperately to keep their lawns alive. Without the creek feeding, the pumps were overcompensating, pulling more from municipal sources than allowed. The letter was stern. Failure to resolve this issue may result in fines. I laughed when I read it. A fine for the HOA, courtesy of Karen's crusade. I half expected confetti to fall from the ceiling. The timing couldn't have been better either. That same day, Karen hosted another community update meeting. I attended, this time sitting quietly near the back with my red folder on my lap. She strutted to the podium, trying to look unshaken, but I could see the sweat glistening on her temples. Our beautification project was a success, she began. However, we're experiencing minor water interruptions. Minor, someone shouted from the crowd. My whole lawn is dead. Another voice rose. The fountain hasn't worked in a week. Karen held up her hands. Please remain calm. The board is handling it. That's when I opened my folder, pulled out the city's letter, and raised it high enough for everyone to see. Funny, I said, my voice loud and steady, because the city doesn't think you're handling it at all. The room fell into a stunned hush. Karen froze at the podium, her mouth opening and closing like a fish stranded on the gravel she'd poured. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, and I knew this was just the beginning. When you live under the thumb of an HOA like ours, you learn quickly facts don't matter until they're undeniable. Karen thrived on smoke and mirrors, on whipping up panic, and then pretending she was the solution. But water doesn't play politics, and neither do old records. After that meeting where I'd waved the city's letter in the air, I knew I had leverage. But I also knew Karen wouldn't quit. She'd try to spin it to scapegoat me, to frame the water problem as something I caused. So I went digging, not in the dirt, but in the archives. Our county courthouse is a brick relic from the 1952, its walls, lined with metal filing cabinets that probably haven't been updated since dial-up internet. I spent 2 afternoons there, flipping through survey maps and property plats so old they smelled like mildew. What I found nearly made me laugh out loud in the dusty records room. That creek, the one Karen buried, wasn't just some random trickle through my backyard. It was part of a designated stormwater management system established when the subdivision was first built. The developers had cleverly disguised it as a natural feature, but in reality, it was engineered to carry runoff into the retention pond behind the HOA clubhouse. And guess what? That retention pond fed into the irrigation pumps that watered every single pristine regulation height lawn in the neighborhood. Karen, in her brilliance, had buried the HOA's own water supply under a mountain of gravel. It was beautiful in a poetic, slow-burn revenge kind of way. I photocopied everything, maps, permits, engineering notes, stuffed it into my red folder, and drove home whistling. For once, I didn't even mind sitting in traffic. The irony kept me warm. Back in my office, I spread the documents across the desk like pieces of a puzzle. There it was in black and white. The creek wasn't just mine. It was the HOA's lifeline. By choking it off, Karen hadn't punished me. She'd doomed her entire empire. Still, I kept it quiet. Timing is everything. If I'd blasted it out too early, she would have weaseled her way around. It twisted the story until people thought I had forged the papers. No, I wanted the neighborhood to feel the pinch first. I wanted lawns, brown flowers, wilted sprinklers, sputtering like asthmatic lungs. I wanted Karen cornered before I dropped the truth like a hammer. And oh, the fallout was brewing. 2 weeks after the gravel invasion, the complaints were constant. The community Facebook group turned into a battlefield of finger-pointing memes and blurry photos of dying azaleas. Is anyone else's water pressure awful? One woman asked. Another replied, my pool filter stopped working. $600 repair bill. Someone else posted a photo of the once glorious fountain at the entrance, now dry as a bone, with kids climbing inside it like it was a sandbox. Karen tried to stay ahead of the storm. She sent out email blasts about temporary infrastructure challenges. She cornered me in the grocery store aisle once and hissed, stop spreading rumors. I held up my hands innocently. I don't need to spread rumors. Your gravel's doing the talking. Her eyes flashed with fury. She dropped a bag of dog treats into her cart and stormed off, muttering something about slander. But the tide was turning. I could feel it. Neighbors who once nodded obediently at Karen now whispered to me in hushed tones. You think it's really the creek, they'd ask. I'd shrug, holding back my grin. All I know is things worked fine before they buried it. By the end of the month, the HOA board was holding emergency meetings every 3 days. I attended one just to watch. Karen sat at the head of the table, her safety vest traded for a blazer, but her face was pale, her jaw tight. Papers piled in front of her like sandbags against a flood. The city says we're exceeding our municipal water allotment, one board member groaned. We've already spent $5,000 on tanker trucks to irrigate the clubhouse lawn, another added. Homeowners are threatening lawsuits, a third whispered, glancing nervously at me in the back row. Karen raised her hand. We will not panic. We will resolve this. The board has everything under control. Under control, I said loudly, standing up. Funny because I've got documents here that say otherwise. Every head turned. I opened my red folder with exaggerated slowness like a magician, about to reveal the final card. Maps fluttered onto the table. According to the original subdivision plans, that creek you buried isn't a hazard, it's the engineered water channel that supplies your entire irrigation system. By filling it in, you shut off your own water. Gasps rippled through the room. One board member grabbed a map and squinted at the fine print. Another muttered, "He's right. I remember something about this when we moved in." Karen's face went crimson. Lies, she spat. Those papers are outdated. Irrelevant. Outdated, I smirked. They're stamped and recorded with the county. You can call the courthouse yourself. I've got the clerk's card right here. The room fell into chaos. Neighbors shouted over each other. So she cut off our water. We've been paying extra fees for this. My lawn is dead because of a mistake. Karen slammed her palm on the table. Enough. The HOA always wins. We'll fix this. But the spell was broken. People weren't nodding anymore. They were glaring. And for the first time since I'd moved into that subdivision, I saw Karen look small. Not defeated yet, but cornered. I left the meeting that night without saying another word. I didn't need to. The truth was out, and truth spreads faster than any HOA newsletter. Walking home, I paused at the gravel bed in my yard. The water wasn't gone. It was pooling at the edges, restless, searching for a new path. I crouched down and pressed my hand against the damp stones. Patience, I whispered. She's about to drown in her own arrogance. Because water doesn't stop. It doesn't forget. It waits. And so did I. It started with whispers, the way storms do first, a distant rumble, then a gathering of clouds. Only in this case, the storm was Karen's carefully manicured neighborhood, unraveling one blade of grass at a time. By week 3, the lawns were the first casualties. What used to be uniform carpets of emerald green now resembled patchy quilts of beige and brown. Sprinklers coughed and spat like dying animals, some barely mustering a mist before collapsing altogether. Neighbors who once preened about their golf course lawns were out front with hoses, standing in slippers at 6 in the morning, spraying stubborn yellow grass with water that trickled so weakly it might as well have been spit. The ornamental fountain at the entrance, the pride of the subdivision, had become a joke. Its once glorious cascade was reduced to a dribble. A kid stuck a stick into it and shouted. It's peeing, while his mom snapped at him to be quiet. The HOA had spent thousands on that fountain, and now it looked like a leaky bird bath. Karen tried to stay ahead of appearances. She sent another glossy newsletter with stock photos of lush greenery, not from our neighborhood, of course, but from wherever she'd yanked them off the internet. The headline read, "Temporary water challenges the HOA is working tirelessly for you." Tirelessly, sure, but fruitlessly. At the grocery store, I overheard neighbors whispering in the produce aisle. "You think it's the creek?" one woman asked, inspecting wilted lettuce. "My azaleas are toast." Her friend shook her head. "Karen says it's just infrastructure repairs. She promised it'll be fine." Karen also promised the Halloween party would have real pumpkins, the first woman muttered. "We got styrofoam." That gave me hope. Cracks were forming not just in the soil but in Karen's armor. The breaking point came during the emergency HOA meeting that Karen tried to spin as a community resilience rally. The clubhouse was packed tighter than I'd ever seen, the air thick with sweat and frustration. People weren't just murmuring anymore, they were angry. A man in cargo shorts slammed his fist on the table. "My water bill tripled this month. I had to hire a tanker truck just to save my shrubs. Are we getting reimbursed?" A woman waved a dead hydrangea branch like a protest sign. "My entire garden is gone. Do you know how many years it took me to grow those?" Karen stood at the podium, her smile stretched so thin it looked painful. "Neighbors, please," she cooed. "We are working with contractors to restore normalcy. This is a temporary inconvenience." "Inconvenience," another man barked. "My pool's a swamp. That was when I made my move." I didn't stand yet. I wanted the anger to ferment a little longer. Karen flipped through her clipboard, rattling off vague promises about water rerouting and long-term solutions. Every sentence dug her hole deeper. Finally, someone near the back shouted, "What about the creek? Didn't that feed the system?" The room went dead quiet. All eyes shifted to Karen. Her jaw tightened. "The creek was a hazard," she snapped. "It had nothing to do with our water system." That was my cue. I rose slowly, the red folder under my arm, and said loud enough for the entire room, "That's a lie, and you know it." Gasps. A few heads swiveled. Karen froze, eyes narrowing like lasers trained on me. I walked forward, laid the county maps on the table for all to see. "This is your irrigation system," I said, pointing at the lines on the paper. "And this," I tapped the bolded outline of the creek, "was the lifeline. You buried it. You killed your own water supply." The crowd erupted. Voices overlapped, angry, incredulous, betrayed. "Is this true? She cut off our water. We voted for this." Karen raised her hands, desperate. "Those documents are outdated. The system was already failing." "No, I cut her off. I checked with the county last week. The creek was doing exactly what it was designed to. You buried it without permits, without environmental review, and without homeowner consent. It was chaos after that. People shouted over one another, demanding answers. One man yelled, "I paid $800 this month just to keep my lawn alive. Who's paying me back?" Another screamed, "You said it was for safety." Karen's mask cracked. I could see it in her eyes, the wild flicker of someone cornered. She tried to lash out at me. "This is sabotage," she shrieked. "He's spreading lies because he hates the HOA." But her voice was drowned by the roar of the crowd. Neighbors she once commanded like soldiers were now circling like wolves. That night, Karen didn't walk out of the meeting triumphant. She slunk out, clutching her clipboard like a shield, her dog yapping nervously at her heels. And for the first time, people didn't move aside respectfully when she passed. They stared, whispered, pointed. The panic had officially begun. The next week was a spectacle. HOA trucks hauled in giant water tanks, hoses snaking across streets like IV lines, keeping a dying patient alive. The costs soared, rumors said tens of thousands. Fees skyrocketed. Notices of temporary special assessments landed in mailboxes, demanding hundreds from every homeowner to cover emergency irrigation. That's when the pitchforks came out. Figuratively, at least. A group of neighbors started a petition, "Remove Karen as HOA president." It spread, fast signatures piling up overnight. For years, people had been too scared to oppose her. But when their wallets bled and their lawns turned to hay, fear evaporated. Nothing unites a neighborhood like shared misery. Karen fought back the only way she knew: denial. She wrote long-winded emails blaming infrastructure, failure, climate anomalies, even acts of God. She accused me directly in one message: certain homeowners may have tampered with natural features to create this crisis. I chuckled when I read it. Water doesn't lie, and neither do documents. I had both on my side. By the end of the month, the HOA's once pristine paradise looked like a ghost town. Brown lawns dead, flowers cracked earth. The fountain at the entrance shut down completely. The pond behind the clubhouse, a stagnant puddle that stank in the heat. And through it all, Karen's smile grew thinner and thinner, like a mask peeling at the edges. She still strutted around in her neon vest, but it was clear the empire she'd ruled for years was crumbling, and the people she thought loyal were sharpening their knives. I didn't even need to lift a finger. All I had to do was wait. Because Karen had already pulled the trigger on her own downfall the moment she filled my creek with gravel, Karen showed up at my porch on a Sunday afternoon, and for once, she didn't bother with the clipboard. She didn't need props. Her fury was loud enough to rattle the windows. Her little dog yapped at my feet, tugging at its rhinestone leash, while Karen jabbed a finger toward my chest. "This is your fault," she shrieked. I leaned against the porch rail, coffee mug in hand, pretending to enjoy the breeze. "Afternoon to you too, Karen. Care for a seat? I'd offer water, but you seem to be short on it lately." Her face flushed crimson. "Don't play games. You sabotaged the system. You redirected that creek somehow, didn't you?" I took a slow sip, savoring the dramatic pause. "Funny accusation, considering you're the one who buried it under 5 tons of gravel. I've got the video, remember? You called it beautification." Her jaw tightened. "That creek was a hazard. And now it's a disaster," I shot back. "Not for me, though. My house still stands, my yard still drains. But you, your precious HOA empire, is rotting one dead hydrangea at a time." Her dog barked like it was echoing my words. She yanked the leash and hissed, "The board believes me. They know you're manipulating this. You've been against me from the start." I set my mug down. "Karen, the only thing I manipulated was a trip to the county courthouse. Would you like to see the documents again?" I pulled the red folder from the table beside me and tapped it. Official survey, maps, engineering notes. They all say the same thing. The creek was designed to feed your irrigation. You cut it off. You killed your own water supply. Neighbors were beginning to gather on the sidewalk, drawn by her shrieking. Eyes peeked over hedges, curtains twitched. One man leaned on his rake, pretending to pause mid-yard work. I knew Karen hated an audience she couldn't control. She tried to lower her voice, but rage made it tremble. Do you have any idea what you've done? They're blaming me. Fees are rising, lawns are dying. They're not blaming you, I interrupted. They're realizing the truth. Big difference. Her lips curled. I'll fix it. I'll prove to them I'm right. By digging another hole, I asked. Face it, Karen. You can't fix arrogance with more arrogance. The water's gone, and no amount of newsletters or safety vests will bring it back. The crowd was larger, now half a dozen neighbors standing openly at the curb. I decided to twist the knife. You know what the real irony is, I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear. If you'd just left my property alone, everything would have been fine. But you had to meddle. You had to play queen. And now your crown's made of gravel. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the onlookers. Karen's eyes darted left and right, realizing she was losing the street. She stepped closer, voice sharp enough to cut glass. You think you've won. The HOA always wins. Always. I leaned forward close enough for her to smell the coffee on my breath. Correction, I whispered. The HOA used to win, until you strangled it with your own hands. The moment hung in the air, heavy and silent. Even the dog stopped barking, tilting its head as if waiting for her next move. Then, like a dam breaking, the neighbors erupted. He's right, one shouted. We're paying for your mistake, another barked. My garden's dead because of you, cried Mrs. Howard, holding up a shriveled rose stem like evidence in court. Karen's mask shattered. Her voice rose to a shrill scream. I did this for you, for all of you. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart. But the irony was visible everywhere. Brown grass, dried flowers, cracked sidewalks where water once trickled underground. Her speech rang hollow against the evidence. I picked up my mug again, savoring one last sip. Looks like it already did, Karen. She spun on her heel, yanking the dog so hard it squealed and stormed down my driveway. But not before shouting over her shoulder, "This isn't over." I watched her neon vest retreat, a small army of muttering neighbors following at a distance. It was over, though. She just hadn't accepted it yet. Later that evening, I sat by the gravel bed where the creek used to flow. The ground was damp along the edges, small trickles trying to carve their way back. Water always finds a path. And so do people, especially when they've been lied to long enough. The confrontation hadn't just exposed Karen's failure. It had galvanized the neighborhood. For the first time, they weren't afraid to speak against her. They saw through the act, the clipboard, the endless rules. She was no queen now, just a desperate woman clinging to power while the kingdom slipped through her fingers. And I was patient, because revenge is sweetest when it's not rushed. I didn't need to fight her anymore. All I had to do was wait for the final collapse, which I knew was already on the horizon. If you've ever watched a house of cards fall, you know it doesn't topple all at once. It starts with one shaky corner, then a slow ripple, then finally the whole thing caves in. That's exactly how Karen's empire crumbled, one splintered board, one dead flower bed, one angry homeowner at a time. The first crack was money. Within 2 weeks of our confrontation on my porch, the HOA sent out another notice emergency assessment, $600 due per household to cover water tanker deliveries. The reaction was volcanic. Neighbors who'd once clapped politely at Karen's speeches now stomped to their mailboxes with red faces and clenched fists. Social media groups exploded with posts, photos of dead lawns captioned with, "Why am I paying more for this?" and memes of tanker trucks labeled HOA Oasis. Then came the insurance debacle. Someone on the board finally called the HOA's policy provider to see if the gravel beautification project could be covered as storm damage or emergency repair. The answer was short and brutal. Voluntary alteration of water systems is not covered. Translation: you did this to yourself. Pay up. The board was livid. For the first time, I heard them mutter Karen's name with venom instead of reverence. One member even slipped me a message after a meeting. "You were right. She's destroyed us." Meanwhile, Karen was unraveling in public. She still strutted around in her blazer, still wore that forced smile, but the edges were cracking. At one emergency meeting, she snapped at a neighbor who dared to ask for reimbursement. "Maybe you should have watered smarter," she barked. At another, she accused a mother of exaggerating when the woman explained her vegetable garden was gone. Every outburst was gasoline on a growing fire. The HOA's grand projects turned into embarrassments. The clubhouse lawn, once a lush showpiece, became a dusty patch where kids now drew hopscotch squares in the dirt. The pond behind it stank of algae, stagnant and foul, buzzing with mosquitoes, the very hazard Karen had claimed she was eliminating. One evening I walked by and laughed out loud. There she was, swatting at her own face, cursing under her breath, the queen undone by her own plague. The final blow came during what was supposed to be her moment of redemption. She called a special session of transparency, plastered flyers on every door, promised a breakthrough solution. The clubhouse filled with grumbling neighbors, arms folded, lips tight. I sat in the back red folder beside me like a silent co-conspirator. Karen marched to the podium with a stack of papers. "Good evening, neighbors," she began, trying for cheerful but sounding brittle. "I'm pleased to announce that after weeks of tireless effort, we have secured a contractor who will—" "Who's paying for it?" someone shouted. She faltered. "The board has negotiated." "Who's paying for it?" another voice cut in, louder this time. Karen swallowed. "We'll need to approve a temporary increase in dues." That was it. The room erupted. "No way, you've bled us dry already. My kids can't even play. Outside the grass is dust. You lied about the creek." Karen banged the gavel so hard it cracked, the sound sharp and desperate. "Silence," she screamed. "This is not my fault. This is sabotage. Certain homeowners," she jabbed her finger toward me, "have been spreading lies and tampering with our systems." I stood calm and opened the red folder one more time. "No tampering," I said, clearly holding up the county-stamped documents. "Just proof. Proof you buried the very water source your own system depended on. Proof you acted without permits, without consent, and without sense." A woman near the front turned to glare at Karen. "Is it true?" she demanded. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. For once, no words came out. That silence was her undoing. One man stood. I motioned to remove Karen as HOA president. A chorus followed, seconded, seconded, seconded. Karen slammed her fists on the podium. "You can't do this. I am the HOA." But the board members, her once loyal soldiers, were already raising their hands. The vote was swift, merciless, unanimous. The gavel cracked and all came down. "Motion passes," one board member announced. Effective immediately, Karen is removed as president of the HOA. The room exploded, not in applause but in sighs of relief. Neighbors hugged, shook hands, muttered words like "finally" and "about time." Karen stood frozen, her face pale, her hands trembling. "You ungrateful fools," she screamed. "You'd be nothing without me." But nobody listened. She stormed out of the clubhouse, dragging her little dog behind her, still screeching. The door slammed, her voice muffled, then gone. That was the last time I saw her in power. Within a week, her house was listed for sale. The lawn was dead, the windows shut tight, and the once mighty queen of the cul-de-sac had been reduced to a footnote in HOA gossip, the woman who buried a creek and drowned her own empire. As for me, I walked home under the quiet night sky, the smell of dust still lingering but hope stirring, because water always finds its way back, and soon, very soon, the creek would flow again. The week after Karen was ousted felt strangely quiet. For years, the neighborhood had pulsed with the rhythm of her rule, her newsletters, her inspections, her shrill voice cutting across lawns like a leaf blower at dawn. Suddenly, that noise was gone. All that remained was the crunch of dead grass underfoot and the hollow splash of tanker trucks making their final rounds. But beneath that, silence change was already moving. The new interim HOA board, composed mostly of reluctant volunteers who'd finally had enough, called a meeting to address the water crisis. Unlike Karen's spectacles, this gathering was subdued. No clipboards, no podium theatrics, just folding chairs in a circle, the smell of burned coffee, and neighbors looking at one another with something new honesty. "Let's start with the obvious one," board member said, his voice weary but steady. "We made a mistake letting Karen bulldoze the creek. We need to make it right." Eyes turned to me. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Instead, I slid my familiar red folder onto the table. "The solution's simple," I said. "Remove the gravel, restore the creek. Let the water do what it was designed to do." There was hesitation, of course. Questions about cost, about permits, about whether it could even be done. But unlike before, there wasn't denial, just weary acceptance. Everyone knew the truth now. The creek wasn't the enemy. It was the lifeline. The removal project began 2 weeks later. Bulldozers returned, this time not as conquerors but as gravediggers undoing their own burial. Gravel was scooped out, truckload by truckload. As the bed was cleared, trickles of water began to snake through once more. Dark ribbons glistening under the Sunday, I stood at the edge of my yard and watched, heart swelling, as the creek coughed itself back to life. The first real flow came on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting on my porch when I heard it, that familiar gurgle, timid at first, then stronger, like a voice clearing its throat after being silenced too long. I walked down to the bank and crouched, dipping my hand into the cold stream. It slid over my fingers, smooth and unstoppable. The sound alone was worth every insult, every letter, every moment of Karen's reign. The neighbors noticed too. Lawns perked up, flowers stretched skyward, the fountain at the entrance sputtered back into motion. Kids returned to skipping rocks, their laughter mingling with the babble of water. Nature had reclaimed what arrogance tried to bury. And then came the cherry on top. The HOA, after weeks of wrangling with contractors and city officials, finally admitted liability. At the following meeting, the board announced a decision. The association will reimburse homeowners for excess water costs incurred during the outage. Funds will be drawn from the former president's discretionary budget, and legal proceedings are underway to recover damages. Translation: Karen's little empire had not only collapsed, it was now paying me back. When the reimbursement check landed in my mailbox, I held it up to the sunlight, grinning. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than money. It was proof. Proof that patience pays. Proof that arrogance always buries itself deeper than any creek ever could. That night I sat by the restored water, listening to it sing under the moonlight. I thought about Karen, wherever she'd run off to, probably another suburb, clipboard in hand, searching for a new kingdom to rule. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the look on her face when the board voted her out, and I let the sympathy wash away like gravel in a flood. The truth is, revenge hadn't been something I plotted with blueprints and traps. It had been something I let unfold naturally, like water cutting through stone. Karen's downfall wasn't my victory, it was her own design. I just stepped aside and let her drown in it. And as the creek burbled happily once again, I raised my glass and whispered, "To patience, and to water the ultimate avenger." Because in the end, it wasn't me who beat Karen. It was the very thing she underestimated, the stubborn, unstoppable force of nature itself. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's this: arrogance will always come back to bite you. Karen thought she could control everything: nature, people, even water itself. She believed rules and clipboards and fear could bend reality to her will. But the truth is, some things are bigger than us. You can bury a creek, but you can't stop water. You can bully your neighbors, but you can't bury the truth forever. Life has a way of correcting itself. Sometimes slowly, sometimes painfully, but always surely. And often the best revenge isn't fighting fire with fire, it's letting arrogance burn itself out. I didn't need to sabotage Karen, I didn't need to scream louder than her. All I had to do was wait, keep my proof ready, and let her own hubris do the heavy lifting. It's a lesson worth carrying into every part of life. Respect what's real, what's natural, what's true, because the moment you try to strangle it for your own ego, you've already lost. So to everyone watching, don't be a Karen. Don't underestimate the quiet, steady things, whether that's water truth or the patience of the person you think you're walking over. They'll outlast you every time. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment with your thoughts and let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next HOA story might just be wilder than this one.